let's see here. Well, first of all, I just want to remind everybody to be conscious of the microphones that are around the table, so that, you know, we can get a proper recording. The staff has mostly just been working on the community engagement piece, coming up with a schedule so we can get things out to the community, let them know exactly what's going on. The public meetings, the meetings with, excuse me, the meetings with stakeholders, and any meetings that might need to take place with elected officials. Am I leaving out anything? The community engagement is what we've been focusing on. So that's pretty much our staff update.
Okay. And since you got the hot mic, after talking with the consultants and kind of the workload that county council expects for us, I think at least for this month and for June, in order to meet some of the deadlines that have been given, and we can get into that a little bit more detail later in the meeting, but we need to consider adding 2 additional meetings, one in May, one in June. Mr. Davis, do you have those dates? And I'll let you.
It's May 25th, I think is the first one, and June 22nd. May 25th and June 22nd would be the 2 additional dates. Just to give a little context, our framework, and we need to go through all of the items that are going to go into the framework. This body needs to vote on that framework, and it needs to go to council it needs to go to committee on July 2nd and to council on July 7th. And that is a hard deadline because that is the last council meeting before ballot language is due. So there's a lot of work to do here so that we can meet that deadline for council.
I know everyone has other obligations, but for the sake of these 2 additional meetings, are we okay adding this to the rotation?
Go virtual with the virtual option.
If there's a vote to be taken, our emergency order, that's the only time meetings to happen.
So if they're discussing information, people can join.
Correct.
But there's no, if there were a vote, you would not be allowed to vote. The question is, do we have to have 7 people present?
Yes.
For one?
Any other questions or thoughts on the addition of 2 meetings and whether we can make that work?
Everybody's
It
checking.
works for me personally, so I think we should rise to the occasion.
Because we've settled on the dates, do we need a motion to add 2 additional meetings?
I think that's the chair's. Well, actually, we don't have bylaws yet.
Okay,
Just keep it
That's
out.
later.
well, that is our next issue, so we can circle back to the meeting schedule. And I think once we get into the workload discussion, that'll help add a little context to what we need to do. But we have the final draft in front of you of the minutes, or I'm sorry, of the rules and procedures. I believe all the edits that we pointed out in our last meeting have been made. Any other items that need tweaking or addressing with regards to the bylaws and how the committee is structured?
We need a number for the number of weeks prior to the regularly scheduled meeting that matters. That's on section 5, 3rd line.
For consistency's sake, what is the county's, for county council and other commissions and boards?
Well, county council probably has a much longer period because there is an actual procedure that has to be followed. In this case, all they have to do is notify our office. So, I mean, I think in my personal opinion, 2 weeks is probably kind of long, a week at bare minimum. I would think that we would just need a week to make sure it's added to the agenda.
The only public requirement is you have to post the agenda 24 hours in advance of the meeting. But other than that, it's down.
So my recommendation would just be 1 week. Let us know a week ahead of time if you want an item added to the agenda.
That works.
Is everyone comfortable?
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that.
That is the only, what I highlighted is, if the meeting location is going to change, the meeting location has to be set forth by the chair at a prior meeting. So that would mean, well, this would mean, so it gives us a little less flexibility, but we know the chamber schedule, so that shouldn't be that shouldn't be an issue. We should know ahead of time if there's a need to change the location.
Okay.
So do you have any concerns there? Okay. So I'm fine with leaving that the way it is, and I think that's the only other item.
Ms. Jackson?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask specific about this. So today, we're assuming that we're gonna be meeting next at the county council.
Right.
That's the way you would.
Yeah.
expect.
So next meeting would be at the county council chamber.
All right, well, Mr. Chairman, I'll move for adoption or whatever verb we're supposed to use.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on rules, procedures? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Carries. So now we have the real crux of our meeting. Thank you for going through those housekeeping items with me. After working with staff, Ms. Hunter, the last couple of weeks and the consulting group, getting a little more direction from county council is kind of what was laid out earlier. We need to have all this as far as the ballot language and preferably the skeleton of a plan. We don't necessarily need all the details colored in by the end of June, but we do need the framework put together. The consultants have a lot of their work that has to be done, the public engagements and the charrettes, which we'll get into more detail. But the general idea is that we would have a recommendation ready to go to council by the end of the month. They would take that up in their July committee meeting and then start the debate for them. And then that would give them the month of July to debate, make any amendments or changes. And then that all has to be submitted to the election commission beginning of August. So that's the timeline that we're working on the next 2 months. So what this group really needs to do for the next at least 4 meetings is determine what the ballot recommendation we want to see. Obviously, we have some kind of placeholder for what the 2020 language was. This time around, I believe we're able to add a little more clarity when it comes to the public comments about how will this fund be implemented, what's the direction. Then those are all conversations for us to take up the next several meetings and even beyond. But I would like us to get the overall concept sort of nailed down and have that be part of our recommendation to go to them in July. So just kind of overarching, any questions or thoughts on what we need to be doing the next couple of meetings, or is everyone kind of okay with that task? And then we can start to talk about the details that we need to highlight. part of what we need to figure out is obviously the short-term objective of this committee is to look at the ballot language, try to structure the housing plan. But how does this committee operate going forward? Part of the discussion is, does this committee become the advisory panel? If we do the mill increase and create the revolving loan fund, does this body assume the responsibility of being that oversight to vet the projects and make those recommendations to council? These are all things we don't have to figure out today. I just kind of want to start us to think about it. But what responsibility does this body assume going forward? How does Mr. Davis and his department, how is that structure going forward with looking at projects, determining location, those types of things? How does that incorporate with sort of this new direction? Obviously, when we went through this in 2020, Mr. Davis and his department weren't part of the equation. So that's something that we need to kind of configure and determine the long-term strategy for this department. But then also, how does this body want to behave, and what do we need to be doing as far as getting the recommendation together to go before council? So with that, I'll kind of pause. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and moving in the same direction. Any questions about kind of what we laid out about the workload and what we need to do as far as the long-term vision of what we're doing? Everyone okay with that? Okay. I'm going to take a minute and allow Justin and Miriam to give us an update and kind of lay out what their needs are. And then I think that will help us to determine our workload going forward and how we want to structure. Specifically, I want to make sure that we're moving all together these next 3 meetings. I think today and the following meetings are going to be the most important work that we do. It'll set the tone for how the ballot is set up, how the framework potentially works going forward, and hopefully will calm some of the concerns in the community down that this is a different time. It's a different go around on this particular issue. So, as we move forward, if I haven't, been clear, or, I want this to be a dialogue. If we need to have conversations offline, there's going to be a lot of work that has to happen. Please, let's continue to stay in contact. If we need to talk on weekends, you just tell me what you need, and we'll make sure that everyone is being accommodated for. But with that, I'm going to turn this over to Justin and Miriam and let y'all take it from here on your piece inside of things.
Yeah, that sounds good, Josh. Oh, Miriam sharing screen, great. I wasn't sure which one of us was. Yeah, so, that's great context as far as, everything that you and Daryl have laid out from the perspective of the ballot language. And I think as we have this conversation right now with the meeting, I think it's just important to remember we've sort of got 2 tracks of engagement and communications that are going to be going on, very specifically with the committee and with council around what the framework looks like, what the local housing trust fund might look like, and getting that language specific for the ballot language that the council can move forward. But then there's also, kind of parallel to that in the moment, but then certainly jumping off of that after, after July and after that ballot language is out there, will also be the community engagement that is necessary for the planning process. We will work and be moving forward towards this what we're calling, I guess, the strategic framework, or the framework for the housing strategy. Let's think of it that way. We'll be moving forward with understanding what that framework for the housing strategy looks like in the next 2 months, that will help inform your all's recommendation to council, getting them comfortable, and the community as well, comfortable with understanding, hey, there's a framework here that the referendum on the mill levy and the referendum on the local housing, establishing a local housing trust fund, there'll be some great clarity around that. But then jumping off of that, then will be the ongoing planning process to actually get to this housing strategic plan, which will continue off of that framework, but will be the plan itself. So what you see here is really our thinking of engaging the committee 2 or 3 times over the next 2 months, as you all have been discussing. We'll plan to be there on that June 8th, on your regular standing June 8th meeting, and being available virtually at the others. That June 8th meeting, we will have materials, and I wouldn't call it homework, but certainly things for you all to digest prior to that June 8th meeting. And then that June 8th meeting will be in person, and a really robust conversation around the framework, the referendums, and the pieces going forward. And then the rest of this is really the schedule that's been articulated to get to the point of Daryl and his staff presenting to council, and then council committee ultimately making a recommendation to county council and moving forward. So that's the short term. Miriam, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about the long term and kind of the engagement that is going to happen around the planning process as we move beyond the referendum.
Yeah, great. So like Daryl and Josh both mentioned, in these 2 coming months, in June and July, there's going to be a lot of community engagement in kind of smaller meeting formats with community groups and representatives of as many municipalities in the county as can be reached, just to hear kind of the full range of perspectives, make sure everybody knows what is going on, what this committee is working on, and what some of the key issues and ideas are that are rising to the top. So building on that community engagement, we will be then shifting towards sort of these larger format community workshops. You can call them charrettes or open houses. And I just want to give you a little bit of a picture of what those are going to kind of entail and look like. So in that period, we're going to work on organizing 3 to 5 workshops to engage community members in the strategic plan process. And we're going to work, pretty thoughtfully to make sure that these are at different locations, different times of day throughout the county, so that everybody has the maximum opportunity to participate. Like we mentioned, these won't be the only ways to participate, but these will be, I think, the kind of deepest engagement, in person, very interactive, and so on. These are a real opportunity for a little bit of a 2-way street, right? So on the one hand, it is critical for this planning process and for the strategic plan that we understand resident experience, what communities would like to see as pertains to housing in different parts of the county. But the other side is really providing education about what are the key kind of concepts and issues, maybe snippets of some of that data we shared with you at the last meeting, but also what are the strategy tools? For example, just really talking about what is a housing trust fund? What would it achieve? What would it help accomplish? So as many people in the community have that information and kind of that holistic, comprehensive picture of how these different tools could play in different parts of the county, and that it is kind of part of a holistic strategy. So I'll have another slide of just some pictures from previous events that we've led to give you a little bit of an idea of what these will look and feel like. So the combination of, more, informal facilitated discussion about kind of, community experience, but also really putting a lot of information in front of people. So providing people the data, providing people information about the strategy, about possible tools, and having discussion around those in small groups so people can hear, very likely sort of different perspectives from neighbors next to them and other participants in these conversations. So we find that these boards are really a great tool to get that discussion going and also to really invite feedback. So you can see here a big method we used as part of these workshops. These were in Ferguson, Missouri, were Post-it notes. So everybody gets a stack of Post-it notes, sometimes dots too, to kind of express preference for different ideas or different kind of concerns. And then everybody can contribute to these. So yeah, again, just a real two-way street with these community workshops. So I think there are still a lot of details certainly that we need to iron out in terms of the exact number, the exact locations, the exact times of day, and that these might be some of the items that we kind of seek steering committee guidance from you all to make sure that what we're putting together and arranging in partnership with the Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization Department, that all of that really does, to the best of our ability, meet people where they are.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on one concept. Miriam's talking about the community workshops and the charrettes, and one of the things that we will be very intentionally doing as we work with Daryl and his staff and work with Irene and thinking about participation in various community events. A lot of times that if staff has a presence at existing events, it's a good time to get awareness about the plan and point people to different sources of information. But we could also craft small, specific kinds of engagement and feedback opportunities. I'm thinking sort of like a micro survey or something where staff and Irene and community members can engage around specific questions in a very informal sort of drop-in fashion within those pop-up events that will mirror some of the same kinds of conversations we will have at these community workshops. And so I think it's just important, to make sure we're coordinating and providing what I'll call just bite-sized opportunities during those more informal pop-up opportunities that I know Daryl and his staff are working towards, and that they coordinate with the bigger conversations that we have so that there's some continuity and we can really dovetail and blend the input that we're hearing from the different, the different avenues that we're reaching out.
Is that, did we stop? I'm sorry, or did we lose you?
No, I think that just kind of
Oh, okay. Just
pulled it
wondering.
all together. Sorry, Josh, I should have actually handed it back to you. No, I think that kind of gives everyone a flavor of the short term and medium term efforts that we're going to have over the next, call it 4 months or so.
So for today, just kind of having laid all of that out there, knowing sort of the work that's going to be asked of us the next several meetings, how would y'all like to see this structured as far as, when we take up items at meetings? I can kind of give you my thoughts on it. Today I'd like to sort of determine where we are on, how we want to proceed with certain issues, where we want to pace this out in future meetings. I think the May 25th meeting would be a good one for us to review the ballot language from 2020, some of the concerns that weren't addressed at that particular period, start to think about the 22 proposal and what we would like that language to look like, start to think about the strategic framework. And I believe a lot of the framework questions are going to be addressed when Miriam and Justin rejoin us for that June meeting. So I don't want to dig in too much at the May 25th meeting on that particular piece, but sort of getting an overall strategy for the upcoming meeting so that everything is a good use of everyone's time and that we're moving efficiently. Then from there, we can discuss how we want to do the public charrettes. I have ideas on where we went wrong in 2020, certain areas of the county that we need to, I think, get out and be in the community, and some of that will be addressed through the charrette process. That was a tool that we did not have in 2020 that I think was a big mistake in hindsight. So having this opportunity with them to get out into the community and engage, I think is going to make the success and failure of this committee. I think a lot of that will hinge on the community engagement piece of that. And we can get into more of that discussion. We can talk about suggested areas that we would like to do in this meeting, if the group would like. But then, in the June 8th meeting, I believe, really kind of digging in on that ballot language. What do we want to see? And then try to get that sort of navigated for the June 22nd meeting, so that we're not just seeing the language at that June 22nd meeting and then having to adopt it up or down. That would give us one extra meeting to sort of fine tune anything that may need to be addressed, and that we're all comfortable sending that recommendation on to council. And then there will be the campaign side of things once that language goes to the election commission. But that is a discussion that we can take at another time. But that's kind of how I see the work being broken up. I just want to make sure everyone else is comfortable with sort of that game plan, and to take feedback from the committee on what everyone else feels that we need to be focused on or working towards. So I'll kind of pause there and allow for any thoughts or questions on that piece of it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of just sort of random reactions. You said that if we looked at the 2020 ballot language at our next meeting on the 25th of May, and we're sort of educated by what were the pitfalls, where could things have been done better? Who knows that sort of, retrospective of what could have been done better? Who's going to give us sort of their opinion, since we're all brand new, right? Maybe Ms. Durant, I guess, was probably on the hot seat.
Of this body, that would be Ms. Hunter, Mr. Cheney, and myself. We were all part of that 2020 campaign. I think there's definitely some pieces with the language itself, why it wasn't successful. So I think having a review of we can get staff's opinion on the ballot language. So I think there's some tweaking that needs done. I'm not exactly sure that we want to send the exact same idea and language back to the ballot 2 years later.
I totally agree with that.
So-
That's why
So there would be some autopsy by staff, and then some of us who participated in that 2020 experience to kind of walk through those as well. But, that's sort of, in my opinion, the beauty of this. Yes, there are 3 of us who lived through that, but all of y'all had a fresh experience to kind of a different perspective to lay some
No, I agree
context.
that would be a very important, topic on our next agenda, that we really should leave the May 25th. If we don't have the actual language, but leave with the understanding of the concepts that need to be communicated in a document like that. The public is going to be able to, read for themselves and understand or misunderstand. So I think it's a critical piece of what we're contributing to the county's success for this. And then my other random thought was talking about the charrettes as hands-on as I think we would all want them to be, with a very broad-based target audience of people actually attending and using all of the packets of Post-it notes and things like that. So the first thing that just popped into my head, I don't think August is a good month to try to start something like that. It's when families are either trying to take their last vacation, go back to school, buy all their stuff, get their kids organized. I don't see why we couldn't start in September and then go on into October, because my experience of the 2020 referendum is people didn't really pay attention to it until it came close to election day anyway. And if we try to, expend ourselves too early, we're going to have to do it all over again in October. So that was just my random thought as I saw that date.
And Justin and Miriam, do you have kind of a general game plan of when you would like to structure those work groups? And is there a certain window that you're eyeing as far as that's concerned?
Well, I'll add that I think our only thought had been to do them at whatever time it is would, create the most opportunities for participation. We had been warned to definitely stay away from July, because that is kind of core vacation time and time when families are just, busy with summer activities and et cetera. But we, I think, really welcome any feedback from the committee about when those would be most effective.
And additionally, I think, Josh, what I read into your question is also, is there timing that creates, is there timing around the housing strategic plan aspect and trying to get an actual document done that timing, would impact. And I think at this moment, my current reaction without checking with Miriam is no. I think we would be fine with with something that would be in early fall rather than August. Maybe it is September as a start, and I don't think that will impact kind of our broader planning process if that's part of what you're asking for. I think we'd be just fine with that.
Yes, I wasn't sure if this was if you were thinking of doing the workshops kind of in tandem with the meetings that we're doing throughout the summer, or if this was something that could be delayed. I just wanted to make sure we're clear on what you're thinking and making sure we're all on the same page with regards to that. So thank you.
And Josh, just for clarity, we're going to have the 2020 ballot language dispersed to our council prior to our previous next meeting, or?
Yes, I think we can get that to the committee members for everyone's
Yeah,
review.
so that we can review.
Yes,
in
ma'am.
advance. Okay.
Any other questions?
Is there again, it's kind of the weeds probably, but I think definitely the other side of the effort last time, we were kind of, I think the habitats that I know of too, we're kind of all of a sudden, there's this thing on the ballot and people are calling, hey, are we for it or against it? Because we just didn't know much about it. So I guess my question is there an affinity or an interest in a PR push? I mean, we're talking about flyers and we're going to talk to exchange clubs. I mean, is that something that we can do or should do, or?
Yes, and I'm happy to get into that. In 2020, that was a situation where we had gone through the task force. We had made a recommendation and we weren't really sure where it was with council. And then I believe in late July, early August, Chairman Summy at the time decided to move forward. So we kind of had to mobilize quickly. This time around, I think we have enough lead time. We can, from a campaign side, we can raise more funds. We can do more, lead work than we had the opportunity for last time. So that we'll be able to have more resources. The biggest piece that was missing from 2020 that we have a opportunity to correct this time is the strategic framework. There was a lot of mistrust in the community that we were sort of saying, trust us to pass this and we'll figure it out on the back end. I think that was the 0.7% difference, was that framework. So, this body and our opportunity to provide that guidance, I think will help us with several aspects of it, but being able to talk about what it is we're trying to accomplish. This is a lot more than just a 1 or 2 mil increase. There's a lot of long-term implications here on, how we're building, what we want the community to look like. How do we grow regionally? There are a lot of things to answer the next couple weeks that then we can go talk about in the fall that we weren't prepared to discuss in 2020. And so those are the types of questions and conversations I think we really need to dig in these next 4 meetings, but long term as well, kind of keeping that piece of the horizon in front of us like that. That's what we're trying to get towards. So, I think all this kind of plays into being able to do the media side of it and go out into the community and discuss it, other than trust us, it's a good idea. So I'm hopeful that we can provide a lot of the context and the meat to go along with this.
But it does sound like it was a missed opportunity then if the key stakeholders that do housing for a daily living weren't included in the opportunity to at least tell their members and, talk it up among their own circles of influence. So that's definitely something we need to hold on to.
Yes, I mean, there was, we were scrambling in August, early September,
Right.
trying to figure out, how do we put a stakeholder group together? How do we do a grassroots campaign? My professional life is in campaigns. You don't put a campaign together in a week. It's just, it was not set up to be successful in a lot of ways. While well-intentioned, there were just some errors made along the way that could have been avoided. I think we have an opportunity here with this body to avoid some of those mistakes and go out and have a more robust community engagement period and talk to all of our spheres and network in a way that we just didn't have that opportunity in 2020. So I'm hopeful that we can, navigate that correctly and not have as close of a margin as we did in the last time around.
Well, it can be close if it's a majority, yes.
Yeah, I'm good with just one more vote over 50 here.
I think, just a comment on that, I feel like, if we look at some of the school referendum where we've been asked to pay more money as taxpayers, they've passed, somewhat overwhelmingly, and I know this is basic stuff, but the more people know specifically where the dollars are going, the more the trust is there. I know y'all know that to be true. One other question, I don't know, but I know there's a lot of rules around what county staff cannot do relative to being advocates, or cannot be advocates of a referendum. Just curious, us being a formal committee associated with the county, are there any limitations that are applicable to staff that would apply to us? I know that I was getting way ahead of the ballgame, but just need to know what my do's and can't do's on.
I'm look to Christine first, and then we will bring this up to the county attorney so she can be very specific about it.
They communicated for the whole time.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I think we'll cross that bridge down the road. You're right. Staff, the biggest thing is once the ballot plan is submitted in August, staff and council will require it under state law.
And then the question of whether or not that applies to us is a question the lawyer can. Okay, perfect.
Mr. Chair, could I ask
Yes.
one?
Yes, ma'am.
Plastic question that I think about. I mean, I know we're all working toward the assumption that we have to have a referendum. Is that legally required for the county council to increase the millage rate? Do we have the opportunity to convince them that
So
they
that,
don't need to have a referendum?
that was an option in 2020. That was what we were asking the council originally to do that. They didn't feel comfortable doing it without talking to the voters. And so that's ultimately why the referendum ended up happening. And I think my understanding is that's the same temperature of this council. They would prefer it to go that route rather than unilaterally create this fund. But I believe technically they have the authority.
I mean,
Ms.
if
Durant.
that is an option legally, I think it would be an interesting.
Well, I think we have to present all the options when we make that recommendation that, yes, we want this concept and plan to be put in place. There are different ways to go about it. The ballot initiative is one of those, but it's not the only. And so I think we need to provide all of those recommendations to the council as part of our proposal or package, however we're wanting to format it.
So that'll be something we talk through on June 8th.
I believe, we can get into that a little more at the next meeting on the 25th with regards to the kind of digging into the 2020 language and sort of what was proposed then, excuse me. But yes, all those need to be kind of vetted and, and talked about as we go through this process.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad I asked the question. I'm glad we have the opportunity to tell them about the option that doesn't include a referendum.
Mr. Ant, did you?
Just, one thing I would add is remember current councils can't bind future councils. So any decision that this council made, if you all made that, would be binding only for the year that council made that decision. So there's just something to add to the way our budget and they approve 1 year at a time. Budgets.
But a referendum changes that?
Pardon me?
Does a referendum change that?
Yes, a referendum is a binding document to allow us to collect the village based on the terms that are laid out. in the ballot. Similar to the Wooden View roads in Greenville.
And I think, one of the things that we discussed, the strategic framework, just to add a little more context to that. One of the big concerns that came up the last time around was how are the funds dispersed? We looked at municipalities across the country. A lot of them have different versions of a fund. What we didn't want was this to be a clearinghouse, a sort of a developer incentive, if you will. So one of the things that we would need to kind of discuss amongst ourselves is what's the matrix going to be as far as how projects are judged? What do we want to look at as far as, what would qualify an applicant? And then once that process starts, how do we go through the vetting process of looking at these projects individually? And that's something that we'll need to kind of iron out over the next few meetings. But I think having that sort of framework in place was something that was missing in 2020. But something that, in order for this to be successful, we need to iron out that piece of it as well. So I kind of, as we do the next 4 meetings, have that in your mind as well. As people in the development community, when you're going through and trying to pencil a project, what are you looking for? What are you not looking for? Ms. Jackson and Mr. Swales, y'all were on the public side of it. When you're doing a project that's working through your council, what were the things you were looking for that would make the community better? What were some of the red flags that maybe you didn't vote for a project? So those are the things that I would like us to discuss and try to figure out how we can create the best solution-oriented checklist, if you will, for this proposal. But I think, having that discussion is going to be important to just an overall concept and how the fund would work.
Yeah, just, I think the other thing too is we have professional staff here, like to maybe even make a recommendation of what would be, in your professional opinion, the best way for this committee to serve the hard work of staff to make the process as smooth as possible. I just know me, I've been looking a lot to Mr. Davis to help, organize us so that we don't get in your way of supporting the work that you all are doing.
I would discuss that internally with county administrator's office and then make sure we were all on the same page and then offer that information to.
So, Mr. Chair, can I?
Yes, ma'am.
What I hear you saying is that you want us to think more strategically about the award criteria that would subsidize or assist some sort of particular housing project or housing construct, right? Is that what you're talking about? And so if it is, would you expect that we would be delivering that list of, checklist criteria to the council and having them approve or adopt that prior, at the same time as they're going forward on the referendum decision?
I don't
I
believe
think
we need,
that's a lot for them.
I don't know that we need to be that granular,
Yeah,
but I think, having the overall theme or concept that's ultimately where we need to get to. I think having that, we keep calling it a strategic framework, but sort of the skeleton of, not just the ballot language, but also the working piece that needs to go along with it. I think an overall concept needs to be given by the July meeting, but as far as getting into the details of what was going to be on the checklist and what won't be on the checklist,
right.
that can be addressed at a later date. But I think having those thoughts will help direct the overall thing that we're working towards for the end of June anyway, is getting that in peace. And I think it has to be part of the recommendation, just not all the way nailed down to the very detail.
Yeah, I think the more we complicate this council's decision about the referendum language and the vote they have to take in July in order to get it to the election commission in August, the more we confuse them about the things that we're tying to that referendum, I think that would jeopardize their ability to make a good decision. So it's going to be a balancing act dance. I understand, but I guess I thought that's what the framework is that the building blocks of the kind of housing, work that the county is behind and wants to accomplish over a particular season of time to meet the 30,000 shortfall of inventory that we have, so. Right? I mean,
Yes,
isn't
ma'am.
that what we're doing?
Right.
Is Describing it as a framework.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
But couldn't we, maybe I'm not quite following, couldn't we give them a more general idea of what kinds of things we would be looking for without a specific list of these, you get 2 points if you have 10 units and, and, but to say there will be a list and it will take into consideration what percentage would be affordable housing, something like that, it's more general.
Yes, I think what we're working towards for the June deadline is that general broad umbrella of what the recommendation needs to be. We can circle back. I mean, we'll have the fall, and then if this passes in November, I mean, there was going to be plenty of time to get into the weeds on all that. I just meant more broadly, these are the types of things that we'll have to work towards. But as far as the deliverable of this body to council by the end of June is just the ballot language and then the umbrella, the framework. I think those are two large enough lifts in 4 meetings. And then we'll all have plenty of time to iron out the rest of it.
And, what I think the benefit is that we have, yes, we've looked at housing the way that, communities do housing with the Housing Trust Fund and all of that award process, but we have the benefit of the Greenbelt, fund and process and successful track record now. So that for me, when I was trying to encourage people about voting yes in 2020, and they were saying, well, we don't know the details. And I said, look at the Greenbelt Fund. That is the way that the county's going to proceed with a pot of money that the taxpayers are going to approve be created. So we don't have to worry about that they don't know how to manage money. They've done it very successfully for a purpose that all, voters believe in. So.
I guess I'd be interested in seeing what was actually in place when Greenbelt went to the voters, to make sure that we're.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really good comparison. I have no idea.
It was the second bite of the apple, I think, would have passed.
Yeah.
So we actually, where we are today is actually modeling now, not what happened a couple of years ago, where we are today with the creation steering committee, we're working on the comprehensive plan and the referendum. We are now following the exact process.
Okay.
That's what we reset on, is modeling after that process.
Yeah, so the more we can talk about that, I think the more comfortable everybody will be, including new council members, right? Because a lot of the council wasn't around.
But with the comprehensive plan that the consultants will bring to council to adopt, much like the council adopted the comprehensive Greenbelt plan, this will follow that same path.
I think we can, that's a very good comfort zone to be in. That's just what I was trying to say.
Mr. Swales, you've been quiet. Do you have anything you'd like to?
I'll tell you, Mrs. Jackson hit the nail on the head. We need to know what was wrong in 20 in every location. You political scientists need to tell us that. I don't know. I don't know what happened in 20 other than it failed. There's a reason it failed, but it was so close. But the Greenbelt, I can tell you why that passed. Mayor Riley was for it, Mayor Holman was for it, Mayor Summey was for it. And they came out the second time, they were swinging to the fence. That's how that got passed. You need those mayors behind you. But that's all. And I agree with the Labor Day. I would not start any campaign until after Labor Day. Well, I was running from governor, I'd collect my money first.
Exactly.
Or,
Get that money.
that's right, get the money, but don't start it, because she said, they're going to school, they're doing the things.
Mr. Rowe? I was gonna say, I was actually pleasantly surprised in 2020 that it got that close with the lack of the details and the lack of a real effort and a comprehensive plan. So, the good news is I don't think there's that much improvement needed to get folks on board. And my gosh, every time you turn around, there's more news and more information in the press about,
It's only gotten worse.
yeah, exactly. So I don't think we're that far off.
I disagree with that.
Is that right?
Because, yeah, Mount Pleasant's gonna ask for increase for recreation. Don't know what the other towns are gonna do too. I mean, it could be tough out there. Economy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
sure. People are worried about that.
A lot of this, unfortunately, was organizational, but thought it was important because it's going to determine how the next 3 meetings are set up. And again, my concern, I want to make sure that we're all comfortable with the game plan and that how we kind of look at the next 3 meetings and the work that needs to happen, that we're okay with this. And so I've been trying to take notes. May 25th, we'll review the 2020 language, maybe look at the Greenbelt model a little closer, sort of sketch out the strategic framework, and then, potentially discuss some proposed language. I think having some recommendation that we could send to the legal department so that for the June 8th meeting, we can have something official to look at. I certainly don't want to be in charge of writing that language. So I think if we can work towards that for the May 25th meeting, the June 8th meeting, I believe, is going to be very Justin and Miriam heavy. And we can determine more of the details of that meeting then. But I think that will help us really sketch out the framework, and then the June 22 meeting, have that be sort of making sure everything is tied neatly and presentable, and we can all have something that we're comfortable recommending to council. Does that pace sound okay to everyone? Are we in good shape there?
Just one question.
Yes,
about
sir.
that. So, and Justin, maybe y'all can weigh on this, like the presentation you gave, the last one was so comprehensive and such a great job. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. And then you got to like the slide that I was most excited about. It's like the strategic planning, considering the full slate of options. There's a lot of stuff on there, a lot of good creative stuff, all the options. What are the components of the strategic framework that we have available to us? And then, I think just from my mind, as we look at timing, that stuff does not have to be nailed down before ballot language is delivered, but enough specificity of the ballot language needs to be delivered such that all of these elements of the planning framework can continue to be considered over that time period. Is that, as we move into the fall, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
The big piece, and we can dig into this more now or wait till the 25th, but the lack of a plan is really what did us in. And so, again, I don't want to get all the way into the details about what the strategic plan will do and what the matrix is for judging. All that can be determined, but I think we need to give some overarching idea, not only to council so that they feel comfortable adopting our recommendation, but when they are stopped at the grocery store or, at a community meeting, that they have the concept that the group is working on this, the committee is making these recommendations. And so while we don't necessarily need everything ironed out, having the overall idea of what the plan is and the direction that we're going, I think is as essential to the language, it's ballot language itself. Yes, sir. This is going a lot faster. I was expecting a lot more discussion. Before we move off of workload, Justin and Miriam, do y'all have anything else that you'd like to add or anything that you would like from us before the June 8th meeting?
No, I don't think so. I've really appreciated this conversation and the comments about timing and kind of, it is complicated in the sense that we've got a lot of parallel things going on. We got to get to a framework to get not only you as a committee, but everyone, starting to understand how this referendum and how a local housing trust fund fits within the broader strategic context. There is that broader strategic context. And then ultimately from an implementation standpoint, there's that nuts and bolts of how do you take this strategic plan and create a rubric that then will help you all guide, or whoever it is, right? Guide what projects actually go forward that would get funded, right? That sort of that administration of the trust fund. And so it's been really helpful, I think, to hear the conversations that you all have been having and appreciating that you're all having those. Well, are we talking about this or that, or how do they touch and how are they separate? And I think we'll be able to provide a little bit of that context, either just with Daryl and his staff to give you materials to think about on June 8th and certainly, or I'm sorry, at your next meeting in May, but then certainly diving into the nitty gritty of the framework. We'll be prepared for that, and just really appreciate the comments today. I think it's been helpful for us to kind of frame what we think we can put together for you all to help, kind of understand and stay on top of these parallel tracks. So.
Thank you. Okay. And then, so Mr. Davis, you had mentioned meeting with the administration and within your team as far as what the department recommendations might be. What would a timetable be?
I want to make sure I'm clear.
Yes, sir.
On what what we are allowed and not allowed to do in terms of making a recommendation. And then we would prepare that and present it to the group. So I guess I should clarify that. I just want to be clear, I'm not overstepping my bounds.
Sure.
Before I make a recommendation. So
Okay.
That's kind of how we approach it.
And I think also, maybe for the May 25th meeting, having a little context about the current work that the team is doing and, sort of the review and the things that you're doing today. Because I think the work that's happening today will also dictate how the framework is set up. So could we have like a quick presentation on where things are today, where you think the next 6 months are going to go, and then that'll help kind of give us an idea of what we need to be considering as far as what that framework looks like. Does that sound reasonable?
Okay, yeah, I can, so our office organization has started to come together, starting to get, who's working on what, that kind of thing. So I can present that next week, give everybody a little more detail.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And as far as the workload, I think I'm in a pretty good place. Nishanda, do you have anything you'd like to add? Or
I just want to make sure that everyone's comfortability level is good. Are we all clear with the framework in our meetings going forward? Good, okay, all right, well then,
I just won't be here on June the 8th. That'd be the second time I missed the consultants.
Okay.
But if there's a way to join
They're
virtually.
fun, you should come.
Even though I can't.
I'll be a big-
Sure.
Okay. So we'll make a virtual option available to those who won't be able to attend.
It'd be nice. Yeah. And then I know you mentioned the 25th meeting, we're good for council chambers. Will the next 3 meetings be in council chambers or? Okay. Okay. No problem. No worries. I just, now that we have to nail down where we're gonna be.
Yep.
A week and a
Yeah.
Or no, at the meeting.
Okay, well, if everyone is okay with the workload, we can move on. I know we need to revisit the meeting schedule, now that we officially have bylaws to operate under. Are we okay adding the 2 additional meetings on the May 25th and June 22nd? I think it,
Make a motion to add those 2 meetings.
thank you. May I have a second? Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so we have 2 more meetings on the books. At this time, yeah, I honestly thought the workload conversation was gonna take a lot longer. We'll open it up. We'll start with Mr. Roden. Do you have any thoughts or comments about what we're doing or where we're going?
Not really. I do agree that we can't get the level of details with council, of what address and how big and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that the more details we have for the recommendation, the better, as far as what we're looking for them to do for support. I think that'd be helpful, because I think that was what we heard mostly at the grassroots level, but at the voter level, the fact that there was not as much detail was very concerning. And so I think a lot of folks probably would have supported it otherwise. So, yeah. That's my opinion.
I know a few of the media people would have
Yeah.
supported it. So, yeah.
So, yeah, it looks like May 25th is going to be just a huge meeting with a lot of heavy lifting. So as much information as we can disseminate before that meeting, if it's the language or, anything about the shortcomings or the Greenbelt project, anything that we can send out just by email so that we can review that before we get here, so that we're all starting going. And I'm gonna be on time.
We'll go to the right building.
Yeah, we're going to the right place this time. It'd be awesome.
And then we're, as far as from the staff, we're okay to get that out next week. Thank you. Ms. Jackson?
No, I think I said everything I needed to say.
Mr. Swales?
I'm good.
Mr. Porter?
Good. I tried to look up what the question on the ballot was. I wasn't able to find it, but well, I'm assuming.
We'll send it around.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
It was a 2-part question.
Two-part, yeah.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I recall it being rather confusing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Never had one that wasn't.
The first,
Also true.
Get the lawyers involved.
Is-
It's like, oh,
Is there a resource or some guidance on, the how a question like that is proposed? I mean, what can and can't be said on the ballot?
we had legal advice.
Our attorney will write the ballot language.
Okay,
What they are needing is just any context that they should consider, because we will be legally bound by how that language is written
okay,
for the next 20 years.
okay.
So they will do all of those pieces so that staff can then administer it consistent with the language. Any input, for example, last time it did specifically say that in 2 parts, there was the question relating to the money, the 2 mills, the housing trust, and then the second question was bonding.
Right.
and whether
Yeah.
it's bonded building. And that affects our debt service and all that, but any input to that, programmatic framework that they can consider, they will make it legal for us. So those points. In other words, anything you restrict in the ballot language, you're bound to for the next 20 years.
Mr. Riley?
Yeah, just one comment. I don't know, Justin, if y'all are still here, just the whole workshop charrette concept has been impacted by the pandemic and getting people to show up to community meetings. It's like, and I have a privilege of working with local governments around the country, and like, how are we gonna get people to show up to these meetings? Just like I read an article the other day, that people aren't showing up to the PTA meetings like they used to before the pandemic. It's like, it's getting people harder and harder. It's harder and harder to get people to show up. Is what we're seeing around the country. And just as we think about these workshops and charrettes, and even, what Mayor Swell said about the strategic locations of where we host these, there's a political side of that too, but I just wanted to put that on the table. Maybe y'all have had some post-pandemic wins in building these workshops, in 2022. Just super excited to know what you've learned. You don't have to share it with us now, but just with that. And then, I'm not an expert in these community events, but I know if there's a way to provide food and a way to take care of children, it could make it easier to get folks to show up, that, it's more convenient for folks to show up. So whatever else.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. One event comes to mind that we did last fall in Clemson, South Carolina, and we were there for a couple of nights to do a variety of engagement activities. We held the broader community meeting in a pavilion in a park, and got really lucky to have gorgeous weather, and yes, those kinds of outdoor events are weather dependent, or at least impacted by less than ideal weather. But it was a successful meeting, and it was we had the technology there. We were able to give presentations. We had boards. We actually had a set presentation time. We provided I think sub sandwiches for folks to have a small lunch while we were presenting, and then it was sort of an open house after that for another couple of hours, people coming and going. We followed that event up with the next night, again, sort of an outdoor event at, I believe it might have been at an elementary school. I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what the venue was, but we were outdoors. We had a fire pit. We had some musicians, some local musicians playing, and really kind of that informal drop-in sort of, activity to kind of, just give a different perspective to the very formal facilitated part. We still had a presentation. We had activities for kids to do while they were there, those kinds of things. So that's just one example that's coming to my mind right away, that we've had some really good success. We are, spending a lot of time, I think internally talking about how do we, broaden participation, ensure that things are equitable, ensure that we're getting, people to, different ways to participate that aren't, because of health concerns, maybe not wanting to come to a kind of a traditional civic indoor meeting. And I think that's where the outreach events and then, being creative about outdoor events and those sorts of things are, top of mind for Irene and Miriam and I. Miriam, is there something else you want to add?
Only, yeah, a small thing I would add is a tool in the toolbox that we have used before, really more in the early days of the pandemic, was an online town hall. So it's an option to consider. It has its own pros and cons, but that's something we've had experience with, and that does open up access to certain groups of people, not everybody though.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Miriam. And I think one of the things that I would like to, say with that is, the more we can find, we hear sometimes, we hear often, online isn't equitable. Not everybody has an equitable access to the internet or to be able to participate in an online forum. And I think our answer to that right now, as we are crafting engagement plans for all of our projects, is traditional open house style or civic, indoor civic meetings aren't also always, everyone's cup of tea. And so regardless of the method, we're usually kind of isolating a particular group or two that might be very attracted to the online or very attracted to the civic or a drop-in event. And I think the answer is just how can we be as kind of complementary with our efforts as we are, as we can be. And so if online is a great option for some segment and that reaches them where they are and they can participate kind of asynchronously whenever they're able to or wanting to, that can dovetail and complement an in-person event that can complement the pop-up outreach. And I think that's just how we think about engagement naturally here. And so I think that would be, we would permeate those thoughts as we craft whatever this fall outreach would be. Really appreciate your thoughts, though. It's been a challenge over the last couple of years, to be sure.
Sonny?
I'm good. I think that we've covered a lot. I'm looking forward to the next few meetings and what all we can unpack and really move forward with the next steps. Like I said, I think that this is a great bunch. And also great point, Brett, as far as our public charrettes, because there are still, some people are still hesitant to go back out into public. So I think that we do need to be innovative in how we're getting that feedback from the public and taking into consideration some of those suggestions that Miriam just mentioned. So,
and to your point, I will say, I would much rather be in this situation than where we were in 2020
Yes.
when everything was virtual. That was a very difficult campaign to do. Well, I know this isn't the most interesting information to discuss, but I think it's very helpful to how we go forward, especially how the next 3 meetings are structured. So I appreciate y'all working through some of these logistical and issue related hurdles. I think we have a good game plan for the next 3 meetings and we can really start to dig in on some of these issues. Unfortunately, there's been some growing pains that we've had to get through before we can get to real work. But I think going forward, we're in a good place. Mr. Davis?
I have a technical item on the bylaws that we need to address before we adjourn. I just realized that our agenda is supposed to be 15 days prior to the next meeting, and they're asking for issues to be addressed 1 week, and that's kind of backwards.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to suggest that we have the agenda do 7 days before the meeting and any issues 10 days before the meeting. That gives us 3 days to get it on the agenda, get the agenda out. So if you guys can, I think we can be done with the bylaws.
so we're gonna put 10 days.
All right,
I'll make a motion to amend the rules of procedures for notice on all matters considered being 10 days prior meeting and the agenda being posted 7 days prior to the meeting.
we have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second,
Any other discussion on the matter?
Is
Seeing,
that realistic, the agendas for week?
that's what we've been trying to do is, or at least have that to staff a week ahead. So everyone hopefully has the opportunity to look at it. So I think that would be easy enough to do. Any other, all in favor of that change, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Okay, well, again, thank you. Unless there's any other business, conclude our meeting.
Good, thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
I don't know if Miriam can hear me. Miriam, can you go? She's gone. I gotta talk to her.